Hey guys, Darren Kai, Coach of Wise Pods, and welcome back to the third and final preseason games review episode on this channel. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the final three games that happened in the AAMI Community Series and going through the AFL Fantasy players that we should be considering for our sides. So if this is your first video and you haven't seen the others and you're looking for a particular team that I talk about, please go back to the channel. There are definitely the videos there that you need to look at. So besides that, let's get straight into it. So like I said, in this video, we are going to be talking about the final three games that occurred in the AAMI Community Series. And from my opinion, these are three very fantasy relevant games because 5 of the 6 teams that played in these final 3 games are teams that we aren't going to see there anymore. Like, they don't play an opening round, so it's the final look that we're going to get before round 1 where we need to lock them in our side. So it's really important to really dive deep as much as we can in terms of game style, how that player played, where was his role, how did he score, and overall how did they look in that sort of position. So this video may be a bit longer than maybe some other previous ones, but yeah, we'll try and keep it as entertaining as possible. But let's just get straight into it. So talking about Fremantle and Adelaide first up was actually probably one of the better contests in the AAMI Community Series. Watched this entire game, which was really, really nice. Fremantle did just get over Adelaide there. Well, obviously Adelaide were missing quite a fair few of their best 23 players. I can probably list a fair few off with Archie, Rankin, Cummings, Hinge, Saligo, Barry, Peatling, Curtin, and Keane as well. So probably a good half of their side realistically missing for various reasons, whether that was through rest, injury, and whatnot. So I don't think we can read too much into this. And that's where it sort of becomes a bit tricky when we're looking at guys like Rankin, who's very, very popular in the forward line. So we'll have to think about that a little bit more. But for Fremantle side of things, there were a fair few players that missed as well, like a Cox, a Ryan, Pearce. So a lot of that back line were missing a fair bit. So it was good to see that they were still able to defend quite well. But in terms of fantasy, I don't think it had too much of a relevance, in my opinion. There's really not too many guys that we're looking at Fremantle because essentially they're the same old Fremantle, in my opinion. They are a very low fantasy scoring side. So only scored the 1338 for the day, which again, it is a preseason game. I understand that. But usually that means it's a bit more of a free-flowing game. A few more marks here and there, and you typically see a lot more higher scores, but even in this game, they just did not score well at all. They were the 16th ranked team last year, and I just didn't see any evidence to say that that's going to change this year. So that really makes me like sort of abandon any sort of interest I had in guys like, a Brayshaw, a Sarong, even Luke Jackson to an extent. Just really want that little bit extra confidence that if they can bump up that overall team score, then those guys that are already at that really top end of the price range, they can just get that little bit extra bump because they have that market share within the team. That just gives them a little bit of extra to have something more where they can be considered a bit of value, whereas I'm just not seeing that at the moment. So from this game, which we can just talk about now, is Brayshaw and Sarong scoring 64 apiece is just not what I wanted at all to see, especially like I wanted Brayshaw to show me something because he is underpriced for what he has done in the past. Obviously, he's been a 110, 112 sort of player previously, but I'm just not seeing anything at this stage to give me confidence that he's going to get back to those things. If anything, it's the fact that, with guys like Young back, Murphy coming through the midfield, whether that's a full-time thing or that's going to be just a preseason thing that they were trialing, it seems to me that their midfield share is only going to drop and they're going to start rotating more guys through there. Like I just said, Young, Murphy, Brayshaw, Sarong. Obviously, Luke Jackson will spend a bit of time in there when he's just doing the midfield forward thing. Then you've got Bolton as well that runs through there. So there's probably a good 6 guys that run through there. at this stage. So I can't see Brayshaw and Sarong having an 80% midfield time this year, which only makes me to think that they're going to come back even further potentially in their overall scoring, and that may be transferred over to a few other guys that are looking to get that bit of a bump. But Jackson is one of the other ones that I was really heavily interested in for most of the preseason. He's been in my team just due to the fact that I thought, as a midfielder, he's been training there for a while. He seemed to do okay there towards the back end of the season, but this game really tore that for me. When after the Q1, so in quarter one, he was sort of the main ruck in there. He had most of the ruck contest over Mason Cox, but from quarter two, that sort of shifted where Mason Cox became the main ruck, and then Jackson was sort of that midfielder forward guy. So he really struggled from that point onwards. So I can show you the quarter splits here for Jackson. So obviously, when he's solo ruck, we know how good he's going to be. He's going to be a premium ruck for us if that was the case, but that he just never gets that role, unfortunately. But from quarter two, like I said, he was not the main ruck, and he was sort of that midfielder forward option that either sat down the line waiting for that bomb kick out to take a mark, or he was sort of in the midfield, and he just seemed to struggle to get his hands on the ball. Like, he didn't get much points when in the stoppage by actually accumulating the ball and getting that distribute out, or being that person kicking forward. He was doing a bit of tackle work. That's probably where most of it came from. But most of the scoring that you can see in this second half also was purely based on that he was backup rucking against a guy like Toby Murray, who, let's be real, isn't AFL standard at this stage, whether he's going to be within the side or not come the proper season. I thought he was a big liability for Crows. He gave Jackson 3 or 4 shots at goal just from a ruck contest in the defensive 50 alone. So I just don't think that they can go ahead with that. So that gave up way too many points for Jackson. So that gave me less confidence that Jackson, when he has someone who is probably a better backup ruckman, so say it was a Thilthorpe instead, who's not going to get absolutely bodied by a Jackson, or not going to have the, not going to be beaten in the air as easily. He's not going to have that freedom as much to get those points super easily. And if he's not getting the points around the stoppages as a midfielder, then yeah, I just don't think I see a world of upside for him at his price point. And again, along with the team scoring in a pretty negative way, I just don't know if I'm willing to go there at this stage. I think I'll be looking elsewhere, and maybe after everything that was sort of learnt from these preseason games, that stoppages don't seem to be decreasing, then maybe we can really back up the truck a little bit and look back at those top line guys just to lock in one of the top 2, potentially top 3 ruckmen for the year that maybe present some value, and just lock one of those guys in and maybe seek some value later down the track, because there are a few cheaper guys which we'll talk about today as well. So yeah, those are my 2 opinions on those 3 guys. Not the most bullish thing. But the final one that I think needs some discussion point, because he has got a bit pretty high, a lot of hype from this game, and that is Murphy Reid. And it's an interesting one to me because, look, I think he can be a phenomenal player. Like, he's shown a lot in his 1 year in the AFL. Obviously, was very, very promising. I think he won the Rising Star last year. I'm pretty confident on that. But if he showed lots of signs that Fremantle want the ball in his hands because he is such a smart ball user. They want him to be the one delivering inside 50 to hit that guy in the chest, to then hit the scoreboard from there as well. So it was good to see him get a bit of run through the midfield. It wasn't massive numbers, obviously, but it was enough. Didn't mean to start that video. It was enough to say that there's potentially that he might go in there at some sort of rate. So if I bring up the numbers here, he only had the 7 CBAs of 17 at a maximum. I don't think that's quite right, but it would have been somewhere around like 20 or 30%. It's not going to be much. You still, again, we're going to have Brayshaw, Sarong, and Young as the main 3 guys in there. Then you also going to have Jackson running through that at a fair click as well. And then obviously, like I said, Bolton. So I think he'll sort of be that 6th guy that runs through there. So it's not going to be a hell of a lot. So the question mark is is it going to be enough of a role improvement to get him that bump from that 55 average that he's a 55 price tag that he's got on his name to jump up to say a 75, which makes him a bit more of a worthwhile pick? And then you've also got to think of how many other forward line options we have in our fantasy sides at the moment with Flanders as a lock, Phillip who's there, Connor McDonald, whether you like him or not, is sort of there, Rankin, who we'll talk about in a second, a Buderick even for the same sort of price tag. There's probably 6 or 7 guys that we're really looking at in this price point that I'd probably lean to those sort of guys, particularly the first three I listed off. Even a Rashelli pops in there, probably has more upside than what I think a Murphy Reid's going to have when it comes to the proper season. Because again, it's not going to is compared to those guys, he's not getting that massive role improvement, whereas those other guys are getting bulk midfield time. Maybe besides a guy like Connor McDonald, but I just don't think Murphy Reid has the pedigree that Connor McDonald has in terms of natural ball accumulation that Connor McDonald has. So that's what I sort of weigh up when I'm looking at a Murphy Reid. I feel like this is just one of those games where he just found a lot of space in a preseason game where Crows didn't really have their full team, so it wasn't super intense as what it could have been. And I think he really benefited from that. But I do think there'll be some improvement there, but maybe there's not enough meat on the bone for me to jump on it just yet. And unfortunately, we're not going to see it anymore. So we have to sort of make that decision off there. And there wasn't enough for me to grab me and just go from there. If there were to be, maybe if a Buderick sort of fails an opening round and that spot does sort of open up, then it's not far of a jump from a Buderick to a Murphy Reid. I think it's only 50k or so. So that can easily be a switch out that I'm potentially looking at if that, comes through. But really, from Fremantle, there wasn't really too many other guys that we were sort of looking at. Like I did mention Cox in my ruck video, that if Sean Darcy were to not play for due to an injury or something like that, and they were to continue down this 2 ruck strategy, which I'm pretty confident they will, because that's what they have been setting up to do for however long that these two have been together now. But he looked okay, he still scored the 69, so he could be that viable option if something were to happen. But it seems like it would be unlikely at this stage with Sean Darcy expected to play round 1, so won't put too much time into that. Hayden Young, if you really wanted to go there, you could if you like him, but I just don't think he quite has enough meat on the bone there. He's still quite expensive at that 87 price tag. And realistically, what do we expect him to go? Again, I'm not expecting him to have massive CBA numbers, maybe like a 60-40 split where he spends 40% of the time up forward, because he can be quite a damaging forward because he does have that leap and good mark overhead. So that has been something we've seen back in 2024 when he was sort of at his cheapest, and we saw that role change. And he even then wasn't at an amazing point. And at his best, he was sort of like a 90, 92 sort of player. So I don't think there's enough meat on the bone there for me to jump on him. But if you really like him, I wouldn't stop you. And I think that's pretty much it. Like McVee didn't impress much. I think we're happy to cross him off as potentially, someone who we thought could be a main distributor for them alongside Clark. Even Clark himself had a pretty poor day with only 63 points, maybe just missing a few of his mates back there, and it was a bit all over the place. But it's a preseason game. I wouldn't be reading too much into that if you're looking at those sort of guys. So we will now jump over to the likes of Adelaide, where there are a couple more fantasy relevant players to discuss, and I think none more other than the McAndrew discussion. Again, he really impressed me with what he was able to do. Stood up really well against some really strong ruckmen in the likes of Mason Cox and Jackson. So again, 2 very good ruckmen that have been around for a long time, that have much more experience than him, and he did well. 33 hit-outs, won the hit-out battle. of the day between, obviously got more hit-outs overall, but I would say he did most of the ruck contests over rather than those two. So if I look at it here just quickly, so Mason Cox had 60 ruck contests and Luke Jackson had 39, whereas Lockie McAndrew had the 76. So he had more opportunities to get the get the hit-outs, but was still able to put up some very decent numbers with obviously his taller stature. So that was really impressive for me, that he's going to be locked in for 30 to 40 hitouts most days. So that's 30, 40 points of just points he's going to put on his price tag pretty comfortably. And then anything above that in terms of disposals and tackles and marks and whatnot will be an absolute bonus, considering he is priced down at 27 as a rookie. So, but for me, the concerns start with particularly around R2, right? Like, selecting the R2 is a tricky one, and I don't think that doesn't come as a surprise because it's been widely spoken in the fantasy community. But there could be a time early in the season that Rob just comes in and gives him a bit of chop out, whether that's a split time ruck or just gives him a rest for a game because he is so fresh into this role. He obviously doesn't have the biggest tank. He only played the 69% time on ground in this one, and we did see something very similar in the match simulations we didn't obviously get time on ground stats for that one, but you could visually see that he wasn't rucking nearly as long as his opposition in that game, being Visitini. So he clearly doesn't have the biggest tank, so he's still definitely working through that, and that means someone else is going to have to fill that role for a period of time. And that more than likely will be a Thilthorpe. So it's just that question mark is Adelaide willing to sacrifice, their biggest asset forward being a Thilthorpe who kicks most of their goals for the year, to run through the midfield and fill that role at 30% rather than, 15, 20% that he'd be used to when Rob was doing 85% of the load there. And it puts him at a more of a risk. Obviously, ruckman get a bit more injured, particularly with these new jumping rules. So is it worth them to risk him getting an injury to facilitate Lockie McAndrew coming in and being that main ruckman? And it's not something I can answer right now, but I just don't think the answer is the guy like Toby Murray, who was doing the backup ruck today, only got the 6 headouts, obviously just was well outclassed and just looked shocking in my opinion, and was just a liability towards a team. So it'll be much different, and I hope, when it comes to round one, we're going to see Thilthorpe named. Obviously, he'll be named. He's not injured, but I don't want to see Toby Murray be named alongside him, and I don't want to see Rob obviously named either. So if any of those sort of things sort of occur, then it does sort to put some doubt in my mind that Lockie McAndrew is going to be a possible R2 for us. I think he's a much safer option at R3 just to be that pure cash generation. But that still doesn't stop us from putting him on the field each and every week if he were to be solo ruck. Like, for example, I think I've heard a little bit talked about this, is Visitini is another one that we're potentially looking at as a value ruckman, maybe at R2, and then you could have a McAndrew at R3. Then, 1 week you may be able to play Lockie McAndrew as your R2 while Visitini's R3, and they're both generating cash from that point because they're both underpriced for what they're going to do. But I feel more confident in what McAndrew's scoring output's going to be than a Visitini in tougher matchups. So you can chop and change between those two as you see fit. He doesn't just have to be purely cash generation on the bench, so he's not getting any points on field for you. Because I do think he's going to have the better scoring output, and I think that's what a lot of people are trying to weigh up. Is like, okay, how can I get the points this guy's going to put on field for us because he's going to be a good scorer, but have that limited risk of, okay, if this goes wrong and he gets dropped or things change in terms of his role, how can I jump off quick enough because he's going to be so cheap? And I think that's sort of why a Visitini, who, again, we'll talk about a little bit later, is a viable option because, again, he's going to generate some cash if he is going to be the solo ruck, yet to be seen, but it's happening so far. Then again, you can chop and change between the two and get the cash generation from both of them. Plus, try and work out who's going to get the best scoring for us for both they're both on field. So I think that's my way of thinking. So yeah, that's just some things I like to think. But that's pretty much all I had to really talk about McAndrew. I guess the final thing I just wanted to think was Adelaide could still do the funniest thing for us and just absolutely throw chaos into the fantasy community and still name Rob round one. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Adelaide were to do that. And this whole time, uh, the preseason has just been a trial to get McAndrew through, and then we may see it later down the track, but they may not start with him. So yeah, that's something to just be aware of, and maybe plan around what could happen if round one comes and things aren't quite named, so you have a bit more time to think about it rather than getting named up on Thursday night, before round one, and you only have a couple of days to get it going. Because I think Adelaide play fairly early. I could be completely wrong on that. I haven't really thought about that too much. They play on Saturday night, so not too early, but yeah, you've got a couple of days to really work it out before some people get locked in. So yeah, I think it's just good to have that backup plan. Okay, if Rob is named, then okay, what's the other options? Are you going someone else at R3, or maybe abort the R2 situation? So yeah, just think about that. But I think he's an absolute lock if he plays, right? Like he's just gonna absolutely outpriced what he's at the moment, so he's just a must-have for us as a rookie-priced player. But moving on to a couple other Adelaide Crows, which are a bit fantasy relevant. Obviously, Dawson, he's always going to be there or thereabouts, but he's just a fantasy gun, man. Like, it felt like he did nothing this game. Like, obviously, besides kicking a goal and having a few disposals, he just didn't seem like he was, at his best. And he still put up 107, considering his price at 110, and had the 24 touches, 6 marks, 6 tackles, and just did everything that we needed to without being an absolute star and potentially drawing some of that attention that we don't want to see against him. So really good signs. Definitely, if you're very keen on starting him as that sort of just solid M1 sort of guy who doesn't have the buy, can provide that captain option, then I wouldn't stop you, but I'm personally not going there at this stage. The only other thing I guess I should say is he only had 64% time on, 64 CBAs, so I do expect a little bit of regression in terms of his CBA usage, particularly if they're looking to run a few more guys through there that have that bit of burst of pace, like Rashelli, Peatling, Cumming, and Rankin, obviously. They've got a fair few guys that can roll through there, like a Berry, a Dawson, like I said. Saligo is going to be the other main one. So, they probably have 6 or 7 guys that are going to run through there. So, I don't, again, see Dawson being an 80% midfielder. I think it will definitely come down to probably that 60 to 70 range, but still be that number one midfielder where he floats forward and B's a key forward at some stages. Because, again, he is very good at that sort of work. I'd much rather him down back, but yeah, I think up forward is definitely okay, and he scores there, so that's good. But let's get into the main talking point for the Crows, and that's being Rashelli. Obviously, he was probably one of the biggest hype names out of this game after scoring a 95 from this game, which was pretty good in my opinion. Like he did scored well. He had the role, a full-time role as a CBA midfielder. Again, the biggest caveat is okay, who was out? We can name them: Saligo, Berry, Peatling, and Rankin. 4 guys that you'd expect to sort of run through there at some stage. So that is a concern. But showed a good stat line, in my opinion. Like 5 marks, 6 tackles, only 18 disposals, a bit low. But if he can be one of those guys that fills the stat lines in other ways, then I'm not too worried about him racking up the disposals. So that is a positive. Also hits the scoreboard. He's probably good for a goal or 2 a game, just being that damaging key forward. The thing that I was also impressed with his midfield minutes was the grunt work. Like he was pretty ferocious in there in terms of he was being that tackler. So he got the 6 tackles, which is equal high in the team. The only concern I guess I have with that is, okay, when you think of Adelaide's midfield again, who's normally that defensive midfield? And that's probably more like a Berry. Dawson does that work. I don't think that's going to be Rashelli's main role when it comes to the proper season. So I think that will decrease. I think it'll be quite rare if we see him get six tackles. So that's maybe one only flag I had with that score there. But Most of his score came from transition when I was watching this game. There wasn't many disposals that, okay, he came from was in the stoppage at the centre bounce and he got that distribution out. He probably got maybe 4 or 5 touches in there as a pure midfielder. Most of it was outside of that, using his speed and agility to get out of the contest, spread for marks, and get some handball receives in transition, pushing forward from there. So he probably will be another one that benefits from being up around the ball a little bit more, very similar to the likes of Connor McDonald's. Just being around the ball a bit more often, he's going to have that opportunity to get the ball in his hands and get those disposals a bit more often. But I just don't know if he has that natural sort of accumulation side of things. So he's definitely someone I'm still heavily considering, just because no buy is obviously a huge thing, and we have seen some scoring history from him previously. But again, when we're weighing up between 3 or 4 other guys that are probably ahead of him at my stage, again, or name him, Flanders, Philippou, and Connor McDonald are probably the main 3 there, then can you really slot in a 4th? Potentially. It depends on what your structure is like, but we'd need him to go probably 85 to be a good option. Like, that's 23 points over is what he's priced at. If you were to go to an 80, it's not terrible. He's still sort of close to top 10 in that line, depending on how things sort of develop in the year, but not quite one that we'll be keeping for a long time. But again, there's a few concerns there for me with, again, who's the names that are missing and how that's going to shake up that role, because I don't expect him to be a full-time midfielder. I don't think he'll be that 70% midfielder. He's going to probably be 20 to 40% at most to provide that burst of pace through there, with, still Sligo, Berry, and Dawson being your main guys through there, with a fair few others that roll through. So he's definitely in consideration, but by no means is a lock, in my opinion. But realistically, there's no one else I would be looking here at Adelaide. I was looking at Cook to see if he could be a potential forward option for us as a rookie price player, but he just didn't really provide much in this game at all. I know it was a bit of a windy game, so that did sort of affect the wing scores a fair bit, just because it couldn't stay there. They literally couldn't kick it to the wings if they tried, unless they're full on kicking it out to the grandstand and trying to float it in. But pretty much every time they kicked it down the line, it would just float into the middle, and it became a big contest so it wasn't able to get those spread marks that you'd normally be able to see. But even still, they had the 85 marks for the game, so definitely wasn't, by no means was a low scoring game, a low marked game, and getting 3 isn't too bad either. So I do think there's upside in what he's priced at, but again, we'll have to wait and see what happens with a few guys coming back. Like I said, Peatling and Cumming are probably the main 2 wingmen in the team. So will he still hold his position when that comes through? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to wait and see what happens in round 1. But by no means, I'm not planning on having him in my team at this stage. It looks unlikely. Maybe another one, the other one to keep an eye on, who's again going to be at the mercy of a few other guys coming back, is Edwards here. Played a lot of midfield time, had the 17 disposals, 4 marks for that 66 at a basement price as a defender midfielder. So yeah, could be another one that pops up for us early days. But again, there could be a huge concern there with Brankin missing round 1, potentially round 2 with injury. Then okay, he comes back in the team. Does Edwards get dropped from that point on? So again, not one I'm expecting to play, but just one I want to keep an eye on if he were to come through, even through mid-season with some injuries occurring. Just keep him on the radar for this year, I dare say. So that's probably about it for this game, I think. We'll move on to the next one, which is only half relevant, I think. Collingwood are by far not the most fantasy relevant team this year, but North are a little bit more, not a little bit down than what we normally consider North are, considering how good of a fantasy side they normally are. But yeah, I don't think there's many value options in them at this stage. But again, North, this is the final look we're going to get at North, so it's really important to dive a little bit deeper in this team. But Shields did everything we expect and we expect from him. Didn't really see anything that we wouldn't have hoped for. Didn't really get out of first gear, in my opinion. Was sort of just plodding along around that side and still managed to get 33 disposals. So just imagine what he could do when he's fully hunting the ball and really crying out. Only had the 76% time on ground as well. He did get rested at some stages in that game. I think the second quarter was probably the most part I noticed, where he came to the bench twice rather than just that one time. So yeah, something to make note of, even though he did score okay in that quarter, but 20 points. Just very consistent across all day. Obviously became, I think he tried a little bit more towards the back end of the half when he really thought that North could win and get that win on the board for them. And obviously you can see he went that 38 from there. So I guess when it comes to the proper season, if he tries a little bit more, then we can see a bit more of those bigger scores, a bit more on the frequently. So I think it'd be good. I don't think we're one to be overthinking this selection too much. He's just going to be that top forward for us. He's going to provide a good captain option who can absolutely rack up. And I think it's just a safety and numbers thing. Like if you were to go against it, then it could definitely pay off for you, but it could also really hurt you at the same time. So definitely is something that you could weigh up. But I think I'm going to just follow the masses here. And I really like Sheasel. He's been one of the best fantasy players for a while, and he's going to be for a long time. So he's definitely going to be an enjoyment to have in our sides as a forward this year, which probably will be the last time for a little while, you would have thought. But like I said, the role was okay. It's had the 60% CBAs behind LDU and Foss, so wasn't the main midfielder in there because he does rest half forward a little bit, but it's definitely that jump up compared to what we saw towards the start of last year, where he was only getting that 30 or 40% as a midfielder. And one of the question marks I had, which got answered in this game, was who's moving out of that midfield if this is going to be the role that he plays. And the answer was Luke Parker's now going to be playing a bit more behind the ball rather than being that midfielder, which we saw last year. So he was averaging 70, 80% in there. So he's been removed and playing as a bit more of a halfbacker now. So that just opens up more possibilities for Harry Sheasel to slot in there as a midfielder, which is great science because we don't really want him resting half forward too often, because that's where he really just doesn't really get the opportunity to rack up as we know he can. So Harry Sheasel, definitely a big tick and should be in our sides at this stage. But the next one was Cherry. He needs some discussion. He just looked poor again. Like I know I've been probably one of the bigger haters on Cherry's game this preseason, but it's just not looking great for him, you know. And again, he's still very highly owned in fantasy, so I think a lot of people will start to wake up to this now, seeing some official scores come through and maybe getting a bit more of an eye on what he looked like. But 66 score from 69 game time, that definitely isn't ideal. Still got plenty of disposals, don't get me wrong. That was definitely pretty consistent, but only 20 hitouts definitely showed you that he struggled in that sort of sense. He wasn't able to just bully people off the ball as much as he has in the past. He gave away a fair few free kicks. Sorry, only gave one free kick, but had to be a bit more careful when it came to the ruck contest, and really just looked to me like he hadn't figured it out just yet. He was still doing his homework, still figuring out what his ruck craft's going to be like to give him that edge. So I just don't think he's going to be an option that we look at, who's priced at 105. I do expect him to have a pretty big slide, so I just don't think we'd look at him. So cross him off your list if you're not confident. And the big concern for me was the tackles. Only one tackle. Obviously, preseason games are never going to be tackle heavy because, again, they're a bit more open. But this, for a game that was as tight as it was, and that meant something to maybe one team more than another, you would have expected him to do a bit more of the tackle work. To only get one is pretty disappointing and a huge concern, because he is someone that relies on a high amount of tackles. Like, I think we saw him average 8 or 9 only 2 years ago when he had that 1.014 average. So he's well and truly off that. And when I went back and compared it to last season's preseason, he had 14 tackles in that preseason game. So just shows you the massive difference that he had between preseasons, and maybe has been given a bit more instruction to tap it out and get it to the open space a little bit more rather than just drop it at his feet and follow up with that tackle work. It's tap it out to your Sheasels, your LDUs, and your Fossers to get it out and get it forward to be able to get more scoring on the scoreboard rather than in your fantasy side. So I think that that was a clear direction that I'm seeing for him, and for those sort of reasons, I'm just not touching him this year. So I do advise everyone else to do that, but it is ultimately your call. I will not make you do whatever. But the other one I want to talk about was Foss in Finn O'Sullivan. Obviously, he's had that role change into a full-time midfielder, and we saw that again today. Was the number 2 fiddle behind LDU, so a good signs there. He was looking super fit and was pretty decent, I would say. Like 24 touches is definitely much better than what we saw towards all last season, pretty much. 2 marks, 4 tackles. I would have liked to see a few more tackles, but considering 6 was the game high, I can't complain too much. So he has that bit of an edge that he can do the tackle work in there. Lower time on ground, I guess, is to be expected being his second year, but that's not too much to be concerned about. But I feel like there is a bit of meat on the bone here. I guess the question is it enough for him to be in consideration for our sides with a few others that we're looking at? I know a lot of them have dropped off in a defensive line where it seemed like we had, 10 or so that we're looking at. It really probably has come down to 3 or 4. He's definitely putting his hand up to be that potential option. I guess the only question mark I have around his job security. Like when Wardlaw comes back, does Wardlaw come back in straight away because he's been so injury riddled? And does he come back as that number 2 banana? Then does that bump Finn O'Sullivan back to that sort of say 4th midfielder? Because I feel like Finn O'Sullivan and Wardlaw play a very similar game style in terms of their contested players. They provide that little bit of edge to get the ball out, but you sort of need that bit of class in there. So I feel like you need to have LDU and Cheezel in there most of the time, whereas I feel like the other 2 are a bit more interchangeable. So does that bump of Finn O'Sullivan back to the 4th midfielder become that 40 to 60 sort of percent? And again, that probably lowers his output quite comfortably because, again, we didn't see him rack up in the half-back line. That could definitely change because maybe he's been given a bit more of a license this year to be that ball user. Maybe I didn't see it quite that way in this game, but most of his stuff was through the contested side of things. So, definitely some meat on the bone and one that we need to consider who doesn't have an early buy as well, but probably not someone I'm locking in my team at this stage, just with a few other guys that I think have more potential and more points on offer at this stage. So that's my opinion on Foss, but should talk about LDU, so Luke Davies-Uniacke, who obviously was the highest scorer for North Melbourne, had the 124 and just looked amazing. Like he looked like he was back to his sort of best, which I saw in the back end of, I think, 2023 or 2024, one of the 2. Where he sort of averaged like 108 or something like that. So he just looked back to that sort of level of LDU where he was just super classy. He was moving across the ground really well, spreading for marks, getting he was thirsty for a tackle. You can see the time on ground is pretty impressive as well for a bigger guy. So there is probably a little bit of meat on the bone there for him, priced at 88. He's always typically been this sort of 95 guy. So you can easily say he's going to go 95. It's just whether he can bump that up even further to, say, get into the triple figures. I don't know if I quite see him going to be a premium midfield level where he probably needs to go 105 to be in that consideration. But 100 is definitely no slouch of a pick. It's definitely that underpriced premium that jumps up into that consideration that you can hold through for a long period of time while still also providing that cash generation and points on field. So definitely one that we can consider, but probably not a starting option for me, in my opinion, just because, again, the probably the biggest thought process with this entire game was that the Pies really played a B grade side, a VFL side at most. You got to think about the guys that they missed with Dacos, Pendlebury, side bottom, Cripps, Howe, Elliott, Moore, DeGoey, and Membry. Pretty much half the sides missing that you'd normally expect them to play. So that's enough for me to say, okay, maybe when it's a tougher game against a proper AFL side where it's a bit more intense, and they're not going to have quite the skill errors that we saw in this team, then he may not get that sort of bullish. So there's enough flags there for me that I'm not going to be risking that 88 price tag, because I'm looking at some other guys around that sort of point that I think can have a bit more of a jump due to role changes and stuff like that. Whereas in LDU, his role was pretty set. It's just whether he can get his body right and sustain that for a longer period of time. Plus, he's got guys like Harry Sheezer around him, which should attract some of the attention away from him this year, but also demands a lot of the market share in that team already. So you got to think about that. The other interesting point I probably should have made, that probably is a general discussion point in the fantasy spaces, with the potential that rucks are going to slide in fantasy scores, where does that go? Like, obviously, they demand a lot of the market share already. So that has to transfer over to someone else, or a plethora of other people, if that's going to occur. So who's going to be the most likely to get those sort of points if that happens? And more than likely, it's going to be the midfielders, right? Ruckman aren't getting the ball, aren't touching the ball as often. You're going to think it's going to be the midfielders that get that extra little bump. So I think we could see a bit of a backflip in the way the trend is going, where the defenders are being the highest scorers in the most recent years. I do think midfielders might become a bit better this year and have that little extra bump due to this fact that ruckman aren't scoring as much and that market share has to go to someone else. So that's just something I've been weighing up and thinking late at night at 2 a.m. Can't sleep. Okay, let's have a think about fantasy. And yeah, that's just something I've been thinking over and over again. So I do expect some of these midfielders to definitely bump up. So think of your Dacos's and whatnot. Then they have a bit of upside in their price range. Not massive, because, again, I don't know if the slide's going to be too big, but it's definitely something that is worthwhile mentioning. But realistically, there's only a couple more that we need to talk about at North Melbourne, and that is a couple rookies in Goldstein and Lebars. I don't know how you pronounce this name. I'm sorry. I've never heard anyone say it before, because no one ever knew him before this game. But both are well and truly in contention for being selected in our sides. If they are named round one, I won't dive too deep into them in terms of what they do, but from what I could tell, Goldstein was just a small forward, very similar to like a Nick Watson. I think I heard the commentators, reference that sort of game style probably 10 or so times in all game, and he did kick the 3 goals in this for 14 touches, 6 tackles. Will he get that opportunity every single week? Definitely not. I wouldn't have thought, when he's playing a proper AFL side. So that's something to flag, that I think is going to be more of that 50 fantasy scoring. So going to be a bit more of a slower burn as a forward option. And he's already priced at 290. So you're paying that little bit extra to start him. So I'm hoping to get a cheaper guy. I'd probably have a Lombard ahead of him still, just being that 60k cheaper, has the better starting fixture, and probably has a better chance of getting more shots at goal, just being in the better side. Whereas this Tom Blemeyers, or however you want to pronounce it, I don't know if he stays within the side. Obviously, Kobe McKercher was missing due to that hand surgery. And again, they have a few other guys that are expected to come back, like a McDonald, a Kerr, a Fisher, Wardlaw, McKercher I mentioned. Archer's out for the year, I believe, and a Hardiman had a bit of a calf injury. So there's a few guys in that backline are to come back. Whether Fisher plays down back or not, who knows? So I just don't think he'll be there as an option for us in round one, or he may be someone that is there for a couple of weeks and then he's out. So that's probably a bit of a flag with his selection, but obviously showed plenty of scoring potential with that 92 of 24 touches, 6 marks, 2 tackles in that backline. So have to keep an eye on him, but I don't realistically think he'll be there. Over to the Pies. Again, there's not too many guys that we're looking at here. Maybe Darcy Cameron was someone that I've spoken about previously and has been in my side most of the preseason, because I was quite thoroughly impressed with what he did in the Origin game, but didn't quite show that in this game, unfortunately. Didn't disappointed me with a pretty poor score. Only had the 30 touches, so had the 30 hit-outs, which again was a strong suit of his game, but just really didn't do much else in terms of didn't do the tackles, didn't really get many marks around the ground. Did have lower time on ground, don't get me wrong, like 73%, definitely could be bumped up, but again, it could just be due to the fact that it was a preseason game, the intensity wasn't as high from the Collingwood side. So maybe that would definitely jump up when it comes to, but still 15 disposals is definitely quite nice. But yeah, would have hoped he would have put on a bit more of a showing in this game to give me a bit more confidence in picking him, because considering he is quite highly priced. But yeah, I think we'll potentially be shopping elsewhere with with what the trend is showing at this stage, like a Tim English and whatnot. So I won't talk about him much more because he is very, very unique. The other one I think we're looking at was Josh Dacos. There's obviously this discussion every single preseason. Will Josh Dacos get midfield time? Will he not? In this game, he played very minimal mid time, which is a huge concern for me, considering all the outs for Collingwood. Most of their main guys in that midfield were gone. So why isn't he playing in the midfield when he's given that opportunity? So that pretty much means there's going to be no change for him this year. He's still going to take that defensive halfback role. He's going to take kick-ins. So for me, that there's no change there. So I don't see any upside in his price point. So I'm crossing him off, and that also means Houston is also crossed off the board, because those two really correlated with each other. If Josh Dacos went into the midfield, that freed up Houston in the back line to take more of that responsibility back there. But because we didn't see any of that, I'm crossing both off my list. And more than likely, we'll have no Collingwood players in my side to start round 1. So really, really not a fantasy side so far this year. Maybe besides a Nick Dacos, obviously, who is still very highly owned at this stage. So that's probably it for this game. We'll move on to the final game. Try and keep this under an hour for you guys. I do apologize. I do get into the weeds a little bit. But the final game, again, both these teams are the final look that we're going to get for them. So it's important, especially with how many fantasy relevant names we've got. But I think the good thing out of this game was that we saw a lot from West Coast in terms of they're providing a lot of the rookies for this year. So guys like Lindsay, Roberts, and Dersma all looked great, and they all scored particularly well. So Robertson had that full-time midfield role. He was actually the number 1 CBA getter for West Coast, so that was a huge sign, and maybe gives me a bit more confidence that he can be an on-field forward for us at that F6 sort of spot, because I don't think there's many others that we're looking at there. And he had the 28 touches, 2 marks, 5 tackles. He seemed to show plenty there. Obviously had the highest amount of disposals as well, so lots of good signs that he's going to be there or thereabouts. I guess the only flag I'll mention with that, and something that I'm toying up in my own side, is okay, who was missing from that side? It's from that midfield particularly. It's Kelly and it was Graham. Are probably the two main factors in that side. So when you're thinking of those two, they probably take up a bigger portion of that midfield, and I do expect a Robinson to regress a little bit in terms of that midfield role. So maybe temper your expectations in terms of what his output's going to be to maybe like a 60 at most, rather than seeing these pop 70s. Just again, not going to have that big role. So that's just something I wanted to mention, but still a very viable option for our teams. It's just whether that question mark, okay, is he going to be on field or is he going to be on the bench for us? So yeah, just got to weigh out those couple of different things. Whereas, Lindsay, I'm getting more and more confident with him that he could potentially be an on-field option for us. Maybe over the likes of Jax, who didn't quite have the best game this week, who we were pretty much confident that he was going to be pretty good in this game. But Lindsay just looked amazing. He showed a lot of class in there. Just hit a few pinpoint passes, particularly into the forward line. And just showed his real class with the football in hand, with his with his kicking skills. So I think he has to play for them, and they want to get numbers into these sort of guys as much as possible to develop their side quickly. So I'm hopeful that he's going to be there round 1. But again, they do have a few guys back there that we're missing, like a Duggan, a Starcevic, a Hoff, and even a Jimby. So that's 4 defenders that are probably missing from this side that need to come back in. Okay, does Lindsay still hold his spot? We'll have to wait and see for round 1. But for me, I'm still planning to have him in my side up until that point. and where I have to cross him off. And he's, again, potentially someone that I'm looking at putting on field. Could potentially even be over the likes of a Grill or something like that. So definitely weighing him up at this stage. And the final rookie that was worth mentioning was Willem Dersman, obviously the number 1 pick. He was good again. Showed plenty of scoring potential, being that bigger body, taller forward. He definitely could have had a much bigger score than this. He missed a couple easy shots at goal. I think he had 3 shots at goal in well and truly within his range, and he had 2 behinds and had an out on 4 as well. So definitely a day for him to forget, and he definitely could have pushed over that 80 fantasy points quite comfortably. So I think he's just one we have to start with. I don't think there's too many other midfield rookies that are presenting themselves at this stage. So I'm happy paying up that 350k for him as someone that is going to get a lot of time. His job security is just an absolute lock. Yes, the role isn't amazing, being a bit more of that winger that may get some CBAs at some point, because he did get some CBAs in this game. If I quickly pull that up for us, can't recall exactly how many it was, but it was a couple. It was, he got 8 CBAs for the day out of about 27. So, sorry, about 29. So, not a huge sample size, but enough to say that, okay, he's there or thereabouts in terms of if the opportunity presents itself in terms of they maybe get smashed, they want to try something different, he may get thrown in there and given more opportunity to score at some stage. So, I think he's someone who's really important for us to have, even at that higher price points. So West Coast are really going to be really relevant for most of their rookies. The only other rookie, I guess, to mention was the Cooper Duff-Tyler, who, again, showed not a whole heap of a lot. He was playing as a deep forward most of the game. Did do some of the backup ruck stuff, but really just didn't show enough in there for me to just lock him in at a higher price point. Maybe if he was 230k, and we could lock him away on a utility to be that sort of flexibility point of view, but he'll be a very slow burn at most, potentially may not even rise at all. So I think we can cross him off our list in terms of our fantasy side. So we'll move on now to a couple others though. McCarthy was one that has been in and out of my side for a lot of the preseasons as well, and I think in this game it only reinforced my concerns more than my upside and what I saw of him, is that he's already priced quite highly for what you'd expect a West Coast player to be, being that 84 price tag. We'd need him to go closer to that 100 mark to be a worthwhile pick, to get in sort of calculations as a top 6 defender for the year, right? Maybe 95 is okay, but it's, again, still not amazing. It's only 10 points of upside from there, so we'd realistically want him to go 100. But the concerns is West Coast just don't score, man. Like, highest score in this game was an 82. Obviously, they got absolutely smashed. That's going to be a common occurrence again this year, I'd highly expect. So I don't think that's going to change. And only had the 1,300 score as a team. So they just don't score fantasy points, and that really makes it hard for a guy like a Tom McCarthy to get that market share, to push it that up to a 95 to 100 price tag. So for me, this only reinforced maybe my concerns rather than the upside. So he has left my side since this game for some other guys in there that I think have a bit more guaranteed upside. But again, a lot of my hope on Tom McCarthy was that West Coast will hopefully improve their scoring ability, and then we'll definitely see a big bump in what Tom McCarthy can do, because he did show a fair bit. Like, if we look at his quarter by quarter, had that massive first quarter, which he just racked up. I think he had 10 touches, like 9 kicks, and I think he kicked a goal in there as well. But then really just dropped off in the middle part. He played the entire second quarter, I think, and then I think he had a little bit lower time on ground in the third due to a bit of a knock, or maybe it was vice versa. If I look at here real quick. So he had 83% time on ground in the second quarter and 84% in the third quarter. Must have been, sorry, it was the fourth quarter he got rested for the second half of it, so, which is really weird considering he scored a 24 points in that half a quarter compared to full quarters in 2 and 3. So Yeah, he's going to be very hit and miss with not much support around him at this stage. So I just don't know if I'm comfortable, but he's still one I'm definitely considering as someone that can go that little bit extra. But I think I do have a few others ahead of him at this stage. And the only other one I was looking at was potentially Harley Reid. What was he going to do this year? And again, I feel like he's one of those players that has maybe a little bit of meat on the bone. Obviously, he has that role change, being a bit more on ball this year. He was the number 2 midfielder behind Robertson. But I think there's the same sort of argument as McCarthy, is that he's going to require a lot of points for West Coast. And again, West Coast aren't going to be the best scoring team. So we'd probably want him going closer to 90, being that 67 price point, to be 20, 25 points offside. And I just don't know if I see that with the impact he has. So, but he did well in this game. So he's definitely well and truly in calculations for a lot of sides, but I just don't think I could start him, and I don't think I could stand looking at him in my side for a period of time. So probably not one I'm going to go with, but definitely something that if you saw something different than I did and maybe see a bit more upside, then he is definitely got some meat on the bone, but maybe just not quite enough for me, in my opinion. So that was it for West Coast, I believe. Just quickly scanning through there. Wasn't too many other names that needed to be mentioned. I don't think Finn McRae is going to play. I think that was just due to a lot of other guys missing. But again, could be one on our radars to have a look at if he were to be named in round 1. But we'll move over to Port Adelaide, who were the highest scoring fantasy side. And had the biggest scores in the pre-season games, with obviously the main two up there. I'll just group those two together realistically. Rosie and Butters just were everywhere, were super hungry. It really just showed their points per minute was just off the charts. I think they were even close to 9%, which is unheard of numbers realistically. So that's something to be aware of. But they had 70 disposals between them, 18 marks, 14 tackles. Really just showed their intent from the outset of this game. They were not treating this as a preseason game. It was pretty much a full hit out for them. And they really just bullied West Coast as much as they want. And the game plan just looked comfortable. Like they wanted the ball in those two guys' hands, delivering inside 50, hitting the scoreboard themselves. So that's really good signs for both of them, and I think they're both going to be hugely popular in fantasy, so I don't really need to spend too much time on them. But the thing to mention was Butters did have the lower time on ground, so he did get rested through portions of that game. Just obviously they were dominating a fair bit, so I didn't need to risk him. He only had the 60% in the fourth quarter, and I think 51% in the third quarter, so you can see that definitely dropped off a fair bit. He started like a house on fire, kicking 2 goals in the first quarter, and had like 11 disposals in there, just plenty got around the ball, and that obviously did drop off. But this generally could have been like a 180, 190, if not even 200, if he played out the entire game in his normal sort of time on ground. So that's really good signs for Butters. Obviously, his contract year, and he's definitely going to have a pretty big impact on our side's early days, and will be an early captain option for us with the nice fixture. So both of those guys, I think, are locked in our sides. I don't think I need to spend too much time on them, and they only reinforce their position there at this stage. And I guess the only other thing to mention is if you were looking to fade like a Butters, for maybe the example of he's not going to be a top 8 midfielder for the year, which I probably do agree with you in that sense, just due to the fact that he does get tagged a fair bit and it does really impact his scoring. He will have those lower days. I think just with the starting fixture, he's going to get off to such a well start that he's going to increase his price point, but also provide that captain option and get everyone off to a really good start. That is just one that we can't really avoid, unfortunately, to start off with. So I think if you were looking to avoid him, I say abandon those plans and just pick him at this stage. I think it'll be a much more pleasant ride. But for a few other guys, we've got Fizentini was another one that I was quite heavily looking at. I know he's still quite unique in terms of fantasy, but I was quite impressed with what he was able to do. He battled well in the ruck contest against the likes of Finn, who is a bit more experienced. Not the best ruckman, obviously, but he definitely put up a pretty decent showing against a more experienced, bigger body, which is a good sign. Won the hit-out battle 34-32, which is again is another good sign. Didn't give away any free kicks, which shows he sort of understands that the ruck contest way of going about things. Obviously uses his height and his jumping ability to get most of the hitouts, and was able to get 10 touches and one mark and a tackle around the ground. He's not going to be a prolific scorer, like got the goal on there as well. Maybe I definitely probably see a 70 as an average, so that puts him on the borderline of 20 points of average, and that's where the argument comes from. Is I think he's a viable R2 option to provide that cash generation. Whereas you could have going back to McCarthy, not McCarthy, a McAdams as R3 to be able to switch and change them to provide that score on field for you, depending on the matchup that each of them have that week. So I think Visentini is definitely a big option, and seriously someone I am considering at my R2 at this point. Again, I think he just did what we needed to see. And again, held Sweet out of the side. And from what I can hear from the Port Adelaide side of things, with having a few mates involved around the club, is that Sweet just isn't favoured at the moment. Is not doing that extra stuff, whereas Visentini's at least providing a marking target down the ground, and able to get a few handballs here and there. Around the ground, whereas Sweet is not able to. So I'm pretty confident Visentini is going to be the main ruckman for at least the starting portion of the year. It's just, again, that same sort of argument is, okay, if he does start to get beaten up, which he does have a few tougher matchups to start with, then does Sweet come in to give him a bit of a chop out at, say, round 3, round 4, to give him a bit of a rest, or does he just get omitted for a week to give him that downtime to recover to then hit back for a week? So that's something that we've got to be aware of, and that's why I'm looking at all ways of trying to cover the two, and that's why I think Visentini and McAndrew really complement each other, because I think you'd be pretty unlucky if both of them were to be omitted at the same time, and you have to deal with both those guys. So yeah, I think if you run with both of them, you can feed off either one of them to cover all bases and give you the best chance of going ahead in fantasy this year. So it really plays with him. I guess the only other one that I needed to mention in this one was maybe a Marshall. I know I crossed him off the list in the match simulation after only having 2 disposals in a half a footy. But is he back on the menu now? Like, he had the 18 touches, 10 marks, so led the way for the team in terms of marks, which some of them were interceptions. So he was playing as that intercepting defender, third tall distributor back there. So is that signs of things to come? I don't know. I don't know if I fully trust it, but I think if he's just named round 1, he's something that we definitely have to consider. He even took some kick out, so he kicked out 3 times. He only played on from 1 though, which is a slight concern, but it's not the end of the deal. End of the day, a deal breaker at the end of the day. He's still going to be there or thereabouts, and considering how cheaply he's priced at 38, if he can go 60, which he showed at an 82 in this game, obviously I'm not expecting that every day. But if he can go 60, then that's still a pretty good pick at that price point, and is probably a bit of a safer option rather than a lot of these rookies that we're looking at, like a Lombard, who's a small forward that may not get a whole lot of opportunity, a Pickett up there, again, deep forward, playing for Melbourne, not going to get a whole lot of opportunity as a small forward. Robertson's probably the only exception who's going to get a midfield time, who I expect to be able to do that 60 pretty comfortably, who again is probably 150k cheaper. And there's maybe not too many others that I can name off the top of my head that are going to get that sort of opportunity. So there's even a potential that I pay up for a Marshall on my bench just to lock in that sort of price movement. But I don't think that's something that I'll do. Maybe an F6 is more likely, and then I can chop and change with a few guys like a Robinson or a Lombard on my bench to try and get the best score on my field as possible, based on the matchup that they guys have, particularly early with Lombard's pretty easy game. So I think it's someone that we need to keep an eye on, and something that we got to consider is Zerk Thatcher and Radaglia weren't playing in this game, so that is 2 pretty key backs back there, which don't demand a lot of the ball, don't get me wrong, but just structurally change a fair few things back there for them. So how does that affect them? Again, I don't think it's going to be a huge difference. But I guess the biggest thing is that it was West Coast. They were the easiest matchup, and do look like they're going to be the easiest matchup again this year. Obviously, Port put up a very healthy 1,700 points in this game, so he got a pretty good market share back there, and was able to intercept quite quite freely without too much threat from the opposition key forward. So there's a lot of things to think about there. I definitely feel like there's some upside for sure. It's just whether he's going to be, someone that they keep back there a lot, or they're going to swing him forward. I have heard him being a bit of a swingman as well, which wouldn't be great, but at that price point, again, isn't the worst thing in the world. So there's definitely some discussion point around, do we start a Todd Marshall at that price point? So that's pretty much all I had in terms of this game. Like, Nevins didn't score too well. Like, I sort of was having a look at him. And I guess the only rookie I think I needed to mention here was Watkins, who I think was an SSP, 25-year-old, that has sort of come through. I don't want to put too much time in this because I think you try and get into the weeds too much, but they just have too many guys that are potentially coming back into that midfield mix. You're talking Wines, you're talking Bergman, and even a Brody that may play early days. So I think he's just behind all those guys. I don't see him playing, so I don't think he'll be an option for us, unfortunately, in round one. But if he is, then definitely someone that we have to consider as someone that can put up a bit of price tag. Because, again, there's not a whole lot of midfield rookies that are putting their hand up as potentially good scoring. So he'll be there or thereabouts for us. So someone to have a look at, but I'm not planning on having him in my side at this stage. But that wraps up the AAMI Community Series preseason games. Hopefully you've got some information out of these 3 episodes, diving a little bit deeper than what most people would, talking a lot about names that not many people would be. So hopefully you've been able to snag a pod here and there from all this information, and hopefully it's been useful there. But yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed. Please leave a like, subscribe, do all those great things. I will have another video up later this week, which will be talking about the rookies, so locking in those must-have rookies and having a bit more discussion around which rookies are best to consider this year. So if you're struggling with rookie options this year, then definitely stay tuned for that one. But besides that, round 0 starts on Thursday night, so yeah, get stuck into those ones. Obviously, I'll be reviewing those games again later. Oh my god, that was my cat. So we'll be reviewing those games next weekend, and obviously those games will have a pretty big effect on what our opening round side's going to look like in round 1. So hopefully you guys are all very keen to look at that one. But until then, I will see you guys later. Cheers, guys.